This cake was for Max's 18th birthday. It is Pink Floyd inspired, has a rainbow inside, and has a delicious chocolate mirror glaze.
Let's see what's cooking. Let's get the facts. Let's see what's cooking. It's time for yoyomax12.
Hello everyone. Now the chocolate cake recipe I'm using for this particular cake is a chocolate cake recipe that my mom used to make me when I was a little girl. It is my most favorite chocolate cake recipe ever. And you know what? I'm going to tell you that this is one of the best chocolate cakes you will ever taste. Now I've made a video before making this cake, so I'm not going to repeat all the instructions here. However, I will provide the written recipe in the description box below, as well as a link to the video tutorial if you want to see that. So make up that chocolate cake batter. Once the cake batter was done, I poured it into 2 round baking dishes. I believe they were 9 inches. I prepared it by putting a little parchment circle on the bottom, greased it with cooking spray, and then put in the cake batter. And the other thing I did is I added these cake strips. Now they're like little fabric strips. You soak them in water. And what it does is when you put them on to your cake pans, it makes the cake rise evenly, and you won't get that rounded dome shape in the middle of the cake. It'll help keep that quite flat after baking. So I baked these cakes at 350 degrees for about 20 minutes or so, until when I put a toothpick inserted in the center, it came out clean. Now I made the recipe twice, so I ended up with 4 layers, but you don't have to make such a big cake if you don't want to. Now, as you can see, the cake tops are quite flat. They don't have that domed appearance, so you don't have to cut anything before you assemble your cake, which is great. Once they were cool, I started to assemble the cake. Put 1 layer down on a little cake board, and then I made a batch of buttercream, divided it into 6, and then colored each portion with some food coloring. And then I proceeded to make a rainbow on top of the cake layer, starting off with red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple, all the way around. All I did was cut a large hole in the bottom of those disposable piping bags, and then added the next layer, squished it down a little bit just to make sure that it was solid. And then for the next layer, I actually did a reverse rainbow. I started off with the purple, the blue, the green, and so on until I filled up the cake, just so that I would have kind of a reversing rainbow inside the cake. Added the next layer and then did the same thing. And then finally the top layer, which is the 4th layer, I didn't add anything to it at all. Then I whipped up a batch of chocolate buttercream and began to frost the cake. Now the trick with the mirror glaze is you want to have a super smooth surface to pour the mirror glaze over, because it's going to show every little dimple and ripple on your buttercream. So what I did is I smoothed it out as well as I could, and I put this in the freezer and I let it freeze for about an hour. I took it out, then I took my offset spatula, heated it into some hot water, wiped it off, and then used the hot knife to smooth out my buttercream. And as you can see, it got very smooth, almost like fondant. And then I put the whole cake in the freezer while I made the glaze. Now on to the glaze recipe, starting off with 7 tablespoons of cold water, 4 teaspoons of powdered unflavored gelatin. Stir that together, and then you're just going to let it sit and bloom. And that means the gelatin is going to absorb some of the water, and it's going to look like applesauce when it's done. This recipe comes from Gretchen's Bakery, and I'll put a link in the description box below to check it out. Now in a large saucepan, you will place 1/4 cup of cold water, adding to that a cup of white granulated sugar and 3/4 cup of corn syrup. Now I used the dark corn syrup because I was making a very dark colored glaze. If you're making a light colored glaze or something very light, like a light pink or something like that, you'd certainly want to use a light colored corn syrup. And then you're going to stir this over medium heat until it starts to boil. Now a note here, if the ingredient amounts seem off, that's because I actually made a double batch of glaze. The ingredients I've given you are actually the ingredients for one recipe, but what you're looking at on your screen is a double recipe. I was afraid I wouldn't have enough glaze, but as it turned out, I ended up with plenty of glaze left over, so 1 recipe of glaze would be plenty to frost the size of cake that I made. Now once that comes to a boil, turn the heat off, and then you're going to add in that bloomed gelatin. as well as 1/2 cup of sweetened condensed milk. Whisk that together until it is smooth. And then you're going to pour it over top of 8 ounces of chocolate. Now, if you're making a light colored glaze, then you use white chocolate. But because I'm doing a dark colored glaze, I used 8 ounces of semi-sweet chocolate chips. Pour that hot mixture on top of the chips, which will melt your chips. And then whisk that together until that is nice and smooth. And then what I did at this point, because I wanted a black background, I added a little bit of black food coloring. Now, I actually didn't have to add as much as I thought I was going to add. Starting off with a chocolate glaze actually meant that I didn't have to add as much black food coloring as I thought I would. I had a couple of squirts of that gel paste food coloring. I used Americolor Super Black, which is awesome. And then whisked that in until I got the color of black that I wanted. And then finally, you're going to take your glaze and you're going to pour it through a strainer. Now, after I was done straining my glaze, there was virtually nothing in the bottom in the screen of the strainer. Couple little tiny little pieces of something, probably gelatin, but very, very little. So I think I probably could have got away without straining it at all. Now getting ready to glaze the cake. I chose a jelly roll pan. I put a nice sturdy mug on top of it. And then I added a piece of non-stick rubberized stuff that you put under pots and things to keep things from moving around. And then I added the cake on top of that. And it was easy to transfer because I had that cake board on the bottom of it. Now keep in mind this cake is very, very cold because I've had it in the freezer the whole time to make sure that it was nice and cold. And then pretty much you just pour the glaze on top of the cake and let it drip down the sides. That's pretty much all there is to it. And I only had to put 1 coat of glaze on this to get it completely covered. I thought I was going to have to do more than one, but 1 coat worked really well. You could not see the chocolate color through that black glaze at all. And like I mentioned before, I ended up with half of that container full of glaze when I was done. I let it drip off for about 10-15 minutes, and then I took a spatula and went around the bottom of it just to get rid of some of those drips. Now this glaze, at least in my experience, does not set in the sense that it sets hard so that you can touch it and it doesn't get on your fingers. It stays sticky. I took this, put it on another cake board, and I put it in the refrigerator, and I allowed it to chill some more to try to set the coating. And if you want to, you can scrape up that stuff in the bottom of the pan and use it again. Now I wanted a Pink Floyd theme. That's Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon album cover. And what I did, I printed it out just so I can get an idea what it looked like. And that size of triangle was perfect for the size of cake I had. That white stuff is white sugar paste that I bought at Michael's. You could use white fondant as well. And I use a pastry cutter because I don't have fondant tools because I don't use fondant. And I just cut out the triangle shape. And then I use just a sharp knife just to cut out the rest of the details to try to get that prism triangle shape. And this wasn't too hard to do. And one thing about this sugar paste stuff, that once you let it dry at room temperature, it gets really, really hard, like really hard, so it won't bend anymore. So I left it out at room temperature overnight, and it was nice and hard and was very easy to handle after that. So there's the triangle shape, and then I also used a ruler and a pastry cutter, and I made a little strip for the light going into the prism. And then finally I had to make the rainbow. Now I used fondant for the rainbow. I had a bunch of different colors. So I just took out small pieces, rolled it out with a rolling pin, and then cut it with a pastry cutter and a ruler. And what I did, as you can see at the top there, I took a plate covered with plastic wrap so it wouldn't stick. And then I took the strips, I just put them next to each other, and I dampened the edges of the strips so that they would stick together to make the rainbow. And I just did that with all the colors. And then it was ready to assemble the cake. And this is a bit scary because you're really only going to get one chance at this, because that stuff is so sticky that if you misplace it and lift it up, you're going to have this black glaze all over the place. So I put the triangle down, and then I put the stripe going into the prism, and then finally very carefully put that rainbow down the side of the cake, top and down the side of the cake, and it was done. Success. I was so happy with the way this turned out. I was just thrilled. I thought it looked fantastic. My top of my cake was gorgeously smooth, like amazingly smooth. The sides were a little bit bumpy. I probably could have spent a little bit more time smoothing that buttercream. But overall, I was thrilled with it. I wanted to put Happy Birthday Max on there, but I was kind of afraid to. I was afraid to screw it up. So I ended up just sticking his 18 candles on top. And here you can see how awesome this mirror glaze is. It is truly mirror-like. And as you can see here, you can see me giving you the peace sign right in the glaze. It's completely mirror-like. It was just totally awesome. First time I make a mirror glaze, and I was really, really happy with the way it turned out. And there's also some magic when you cut into this cake, because when you cut into it, you have that wonderful chocolate cake, but then you also have that alternating rainbow in between each of the layers, and it makes it extra special. So you know what? If you've never tried a mirror glaze before, I'm kind of late on the bandwagon to try this because I know it's been done a million times by other people, but I was really happy with the way this turned out. Thanks for watching. This is Max's 18th birthday cake. There was no 17th birthday cake because Max and I were on a trip to Italy and Greece, and we were actually in an airplane over the Atlantic on our birthday last year because Max and I do share a birthday. However, I have made special cakes for him all the other years, and if you look on your screen right now, you'll see the videos of all the cakes that I have made for him if you want to go check that out. Thanks for watching.